that. I am so excited to be here with so many of you. Happy Valentine's Day. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Randi Braun. Welcome to everyone who is joining for a Something Major special Valentine's Day program, Falling in Love Again with Your Career, with my incredible friend and colleague, Johnny Guidry, who I'm going to introduce formally in just one second. Before I make introductions between me and Johnny, I would love to hear from you. Please put in the chat, where are you joining us from today? And if you have one, what is your favorite Valentine's Day candy? So, where are you joining us from today? And if you have one, what is your favorite Valentine's Day candy? For me, I love those Reese's peanut butter cups that are in the shapes of the hearts. I just find the special edition Reese's, like whether they're the ghosts at Halloween or the hearts at Valentine's Day, they have the perfect peanut butter to chocolate ratio. So I can't wait to hear from you all. And as we're seeing things come in from the chat, oh my God, we have people from all over San Antonio, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Texas, Columbus, Ohio, Westport, Connecticut, Scenery Hill, Pennsylvania, Arlington, Virginia, LA, Boulder, more Californians, a lot of Angelinos in the house. Good morning to everyone in California, New York City. And I see that our tastes in sweets are just about as varied as our geography. Knoxville coming in the house, gummy bears in the house, sweet tarts, chocolates, caramel. I think representation across basically every time zone in the United States for this conversation, and apparently every single taste that you could potentially have in sweets. So I'm glad from the jump, Johnny, that we're going to have a diverse audience and diverse conversation.
Yeah.
Um, Thank you for introducing yourself. Let me introduce myself and introduce Johnny. For those of you who I don't know, I'm Randi Braun. I am an executive coach. I am the founder of the women's leadership firm Something Major, and I am the author of this book, Something Major, the new playbook for women at work, which just got re-released in paperback. So if you haven't picked it up yet, now is the time to do that. You'll be my Valentine if you do that. And I am so excited to introduce you to my colleague, Johnny Guidry. Johnny, welcome.
Hi there, Randy. It's so great to be here with you. Everyone, I'm here in Washington, D.C., just a stone's throw from Randy. I'm also a coach. That's where Randy and I got to meet back in our training days. I work with people who are looking into career pivots. I'm a former HR director and a podcast host. So I'm really looking forward to being here and digging deep into this because I think it's important on this day where we're putting love on top, like Beyonce told us to do. We take our marching orders from Beyonce and we're going to apply that to our careers for sure.
Literally can't wait. And Johnny, that was a fabulous introduction. Johnny is also very humble, so I'm going to connect a few of the dots about some of the amazing things that Johnny has done. Johnny spent over 16 years working in HR. He is widely considered to be an HR expert, a culture expert, an adult learning expert, and he's had leadership roles at a lot of the companies you might know, like Bloomingdale's corporate. Johnny, we still never talked about how you made use of the employee discount, so we can talk about putting my retail love on top after this event. Years ago, Johnny, and it's a story I'm going to ask you to tell today. I know that you fell in love with your own career again by making the transition to coaching.
Yeah.
It's how we met many moons ago when we were both training. And today I'm so honored to have Johnny be a part of the Something Major family. He is our director of career coaching here at Something Major. He is our guru on all things resume, on all things interview, on all things purpose. And I always joke that Johnny is like a life purpose career whisperer. So I can't wait, Johnny, to have you here to share your insights. He
Thank
also
you.
has a chart topping podcast called Refractive, which has hit the top podcast charts on Apple, like in a dozen countries. So we're going to have to talk more about your pod too.
Love it.
Johnny, I want to jump in before I ask you the first question. I want to remind everybody who's here with us in the chat, this is about falling in love with your career again. So we want to hear your questions. And I want to just give a little bit of setup to our conversation today. You know, Johnny, we talked about the diversity. We laughed about the diversity of our taste in candy. We have the geographic diversity in the room. I see that we have people in the room who run their own businesses, who are in career transition, who have maybe been in their organizations for a lot of years. And I want to say that falling in love again with your career is really, really personal.
Yeah.
Some of us haven't felt that spark for a long time. Maybe some of us are aware, as we do get in some relationships, like something's fading and we're not sure how to rekindle it before it does. And still some of us maybe like never have even felt that ever in the first place. And so like any good relationship, the relationship with our careers, it's not about one single thing. It's about all the little things, all the interactions, all the choices, all the ways that we show up day in and day out. So today, Johnny and I are going to have a really wide ranging conversation about almost like how to look at as many pieces of that jigsaw puzzle and leave them to you to walk away from today to put them back together again. So, with that, Johnny, I want to actually throw it to you. And again, this is my plug. We want to hear your questions. This is your chance to basically ask Johnny anything that's on your mind. Johnny, I alluded to it in the intro. You were once in a career that you didn't love so much, and you went through your own origin story, really, of falling in love with your career, leaving a really high profile job, managing learning and development for all the Americas for Sofitel hotels. Can you tell us a little bit more about your own personal story, realizing that you weren't in love anymore and looking to find it in your work life?
Well, look, the year that I graduated from college, I was hungry for adventure. I moved to South Beach. I started working as a front desk agent at a hotel company, and I was just having fun, right? I was just there for partying, and I got approached by the human resources team, and I was invited to join HR. And for me, I was so validated by that invitation. I had no background in that. I had never studied it. I was a foreign language major. Like this was not on my radar. And so I said yes, even though the idea of working an office 9 to 5 was repugnant to me. Like I was living in South Beach. I did not want to have to be in the office for 8 o'clock. And so, but I said yes because I wanted more pats on the back. I wanted more recognition. And so I took it. And that started a long, long process of pursuing validation in a career that was never the right fit for me. Now, it doesn't mean that I didn't have success. It doesn't, in fact, I was promoted something like 8 times in 11 years at that hotel company. And it really shaped the rest of my life, yet it was never the right fit. And it took 16 years for me to find the courage and the inspiration and the self-love to actually walk away. Because as you know, Randy, when you make that type of pivot, all the fears come flooding forth.
Of course.
What am I going to be able to earn if I jump into a completely new line of work? How am I going to secure my future? Am I going to come back crawling on my hands and knees to my old career a year from now and will have destroyed everything? All of those fears were real, and it was a lot to walk through. It took a long time for me.
And I'd love to hear from you all in the chat. Just give me like a +1 if you have ever made a decision in your career because somebody validated you or invited you to do it or gave you the pat on the back for doing it. I feel like in my 20s, so many of the choices that I made were about like seeking the validation from other people who I looked up to. And I was like, oh, well, if an executive Y thinks that I'm a good fit for this, then I must be. And
Yes.
I think especially, Johnny, I know that you spend so much time coaching high performing women. That's like really where we hang out at something major in terms of the clients that we work with. And I see this so often. I know you do too in our coaching practice with really high performing women where we have been told this story, and it's something I write about in my book, that we want to solicit as much feedback as possible. And I think we fall into these traps where we start to make decisions based on making sure other people love us
Yes,
instead of making sure that we're in love with our
that's right.
careers. And clearly, we struck a nerve here, Johnny, because we have a lot of +1s in the chat. And as I talk about very openly in my book, I'm a total like recovering from external validation junkie, which is like a whole nother conversation for a whole nother day. Johnny, like my origin story, as you know, is just a little bit different. Like I actually wasn't unhappy in my career. I was working for years in sales. I loved it. I thought I was going to be the chief fundraising, the chief revenue officer of a company. And I fell into this work completely by accident. And it just like coaching and speaking on the side became like so big so fast that I just couldn't do it all. And I took this leap. Not because I thought it was the right thing or the wrong thing to do, not because I had like a 10-point business plan, but because I was just like, it was just, I was curious and I felt like there was enough proof of concept to say, like, it's worth giving it a try. And I think sometimes, Johnny, the traps that we fall into that keep us from loving our careers is feeling like we want certainty. And when I look at your journey and my journey, like what connects it is a willingness to be in the uncertainty. When
Yes.
I think about some of the clients I know that I've worked with, and I'm sure you have with as well, what has been kind of like the portal to their next great chapter has been willing to walk through the door, not knowing what it's going to look like. Or if anyone here ever played like Super Mario, can I also get like a plus one in the chat? Like, did anyone here ever play like old school Super Mario on Super Nintendo? Like, with like the gray and the purple controllers, like at the end of a
Yes.
level, you would like jump through these green tubes and like pour it out through the other side. And you just didn't
Yes.
know what it was going to be, but you knew you trusted to go through the green tube and level up. And I think that's what we need to be willing to do. Um, and I love that everyone here also played Super Mario and Game Boy. So we're being like a little generationally specific, I know. Johnny, bringing it back to the task at hand, careers that we love. Let's just make sure we're holding hands on the same language. And I would love to hear from you all in the chat. I'm going to ask Johnny this question and feel free to also give us your answer in the chat. What do you think having a career you love means to you? What does
Mm.
having a career you love what does that mean to you? And Johnny, while you're speaking, I invite others in the chat to share their perspective too.
Yes. Look, Jeannie, giving up security, that was big for me too. So shout out there. Listen, when I think about what it means to love my career, there's a book that I read shortly after making the leap, and I'm like, why didn't I have access to this book before? And it's called Limitless by this amazing writer. Her name is Laura Gassner Otting. And she talks about these 4 C's that make up consonants with your career. And what Laura says, and it really speaks directly to me, was control, contribution, calling, and connection.
Can you say it one more
Control,
time?
yes, control, contribution, calling, and connection.
I just put it
And
in the chat.
yes, thank you. And we get to define what those 4 things mean, right? So what they mean to one person is completely irrelevant. But the fact is, when I look at these elements, how much control do I need in my career? Maybe it's like something I can just plug into a very structured environment. Maybe I need to be fully calling the shots. How much connection do I need, either with my colleagues or with the decision makers? Maybe I need a lot. Maybe I don't need much. Maybe I want to work fully from home. Maybe I don't ever want to engage with my colleagues. I only want to work with clients. It's all up to you, but it's about getting clear on what matters to you. And I know, Randy, you and I, when we work with clients, one of the first things we always do is get at the values and the motivators. And there's no better advice I can give to someone who feels confused about their drive to make a pivot than know what you want and know what you don't want. And everything you think you know about what you want, you need to challenge it. Do I really want that because it's what's pulling my heartstrings? Or do I want it because that's what my parents always told me a good worker does? Or that's what
I love
society tells me is safe?
I love that. I have a former client of mine, and she would come to coaching, and she's like, "I caught myself shooting all over myself today,"
Yes.
and I just loved that because, like, obviously, like it's cheeky and it's fun, and I love anything that's cheeky and fun. But I think especially as high performing women, we fall into these traps where we're so directed by all the shoulds. And it's not because like we're deficient, right? It's not because like I'm not confident or I'm not successful. And as I look at the incredible women who are in the chat today, there's nothing wrong with that. It's about how we are socialized to be good girls, to fit into boxes. And of course, if you come from any kind of marginalized community, if you live with any kind of intersectional identity, right, the rules about how you are supposed to fit in only get even more complex and the consequences only get higher. And so it's no wonder that so many of us feel like we're so restricted, both in the literal like sense of, feeling like we're not getting recognized or feeling like we're not getting what we need, to even feeling like sometimes we don't have the courage or the right to dream about the things that we want. For me, when I think about, what it is to love our career, one of the biggest myths that holds us back, Johnny, is that we live in a culture where our career is supposed to be everything about who we are and what our self-worth is. It's about your title, it's about how successful you are, it's about like making sure that you're showing up on LinkedIn as like the leader in your field. And so like there's a reason we have such a disconnect. We have people who are trying to make their career everything, and then they're wondering why they're so burnt out all the time. And when I think about a career, whenever someone asks me about a career that they love, I always say it's about building a life that you love, and career should be a piece of it. For me, Johnny, and for you, and for a lot of the people who are in the chat, career is like a huge cornerstone of a life that I love. Like this work is work I love to do. If I won the lottery tomorrow, I would not change a thing about how I show up at something major and run this company and work full time. That's a privilege, right? My career is very important to me, but it's about, again, like what you said about the connection and the control, like really getting clear about what it is that you want and what it is that you don't want. And
Yeah.
the last thing I'll say about this, Johnny, is I find that sometimes, especially again, as high performing women, we just don't give ourselves the permission to carve out the time to think about these things. Like
Yes.
so often I talk to my clients and they're like, I don't even have time to think about what's next. And so what happens is like they're thinking about it when they're walking the dog, when they're washing their hair, when they're, maybe doing the night feed of a baby or driving home from dropping off their once baby at college. And then all of a sudden it just like floods in and they're so overwhelmed that it's like, well, I can't even think about it because I'm overwhelmed by the overwhelm itself. And so we need to create space to like get curious. And I know I said that was the last thing, but I'm going to say one more thing, Johnny, and then I'm going to pause and see how it lands with you. I was just talking to somebody yesterday, actually, and she was feeling so strained about this big decision point she had to make in her
Mhm.
career. And I said, can I posit a theory about why you're feeling so much anguish about this? And she said, sure. I said, I think that you feel like you need to be in decision making mode, but actually you need to be in information gathering mode. And so I want to encourage you to think about like what does it look like to be in information gathering mode? Like when you're
Yes.
thinking about what would a career that I love look like, whether it's staying in my organization and
Yes.
just reforming how I show up, or it's doing something new or starting my own business or making a pivot, do I need the answers or do I need to think about the questions I need to ask so that the answers come with ease?
Right.
Johnny, I just threw like 100 ideas out at you. Like any of them you want to respond to? Any thoughts here?
Well, here's what popped into my mind as you were talking. Um, it's this idea of looking at my life and saying, what facets of my life feel good right now? Okay, so I understand that. What facets of my life don't feel good right now? And that is really fertile soil for taking a look at where is my power? What is my reality? And maybe today I can't jump out of my career that I don't love today because I have to take care of my I have, I'm my child is about to start school and I have a whole slew of expenses that are going to come up with that. And I don't feel right upsetting the flow of life right now. But I've looked at what doesn't feel right. I've compared it to what's driving me on the inside. I have some clarity around that now. And I'm going to put together a 3-year plan because 3 years from now, I will have been able to set up enough financial stability, done the research that I need to do, understand what I want and don't want from a career, build my network, and taken, let's say, loving, gentle steps towards the future I want on a timeline that makes sense.
Okay, let me build on that for a second. I think that this idea of taking small steps is something that like we are allergic to as a society, and it is the key. And Johnny, I know that you've heard me describe like treating your goals like a fine wine instead of a keg stand. I know sometimes Forbes let me write an article about this. Sometimes I pitch things to them, and I'm like, there's no way that they're going to put this on the internet. And apparently they let me put it on the
It's
internet.
fixed.
So, shout out to my editors at Forbes. If any of you are in the room, thanks for letting me be me. Johnny, I feel like sometimes we treat our goals like a keg stand, where it's like we get I'm not saying I've done a keg stand. Like, I'm not going to make any professional commentary on that. And I don't judge you if you have. That's fine. I'm not going to throw a +1 in the chat if you've ever done a keg stand, though I am like low key curious, but we won't do that today. So, all this to say, I think sometimes that we treat our goals like a keg stand where it's like we get caught up in the moment, we get the rush, we go upside down, we take the big swig from the keg stand, and like we're having a good time in the moment. And then we wake up the next morning with a hangover, a bloated belly, and we're like, what was I thinking? I have no energy to ever do that again. So many of us are treating our goals like a keg stand, whether it's like, I'm going to get healthy. So I like buy the $700 Equinox registration fee and commit to paying them $400 a month for machines I'm never going to use. Or I'm going to pay someone thousands of dollars to rewrite my resume, even though I don't know what I want to go on my resume, right? I know, right? And so instead, I want us to treat our goals, and even if you're not a drinker, I want you to just use this as a metaphor, as a fine wine. A fine wine is something that you sip and you savor, right? And so when I say that, it's about, yeah, exactly. It's about like taking small steps, sending one email, having one conversation, doing one thing of outreach, and then to savor, right? Is celebrating the wins, sharing your experiences with other people. So I think that's really important. And that's like what we want to say yes to is those small steps. I also think it's really important, Johnny, to set boundaries, right? So many of us are in careers that we don't love, not because we don't like the work, but because we never learned how to set boundaries with stakeholders, or we never learned how to set boundaries with ourselves so that we can feel whole outside of work. I know, just getting really tactical, Johnny, I know that you have this tool around setting your authentic no. And I think it's something that's really helpful. Could you walk the group through like what it means to set an authentic no?
Yeah. So first off, listen, I'm not going to get into her, but you want to talk about a powerful woman. Byron Katie is one of my favorite writers. She's in the spiritual kind of writing niche, and she is where I heard about this authentic no. And her whole point was that if I'm following my own path of love, it can't be wrong for you. You may not realize it, but a kindness to me, done for pure kindness to me, is also a kindness to all. And so the authentic no is simply not giving explanations, reasons, not trying to soften the blow of the word no, because no is not an attack. No is not an insult. If you ask me to go on a date with you and I don't want to go and I say no, that's not an insult, even if you believe it is. I get it. I understand, but it is not an attack. And so the idea that we have to be so concerned with not trusting the person we're speaking to be healthy and whole enough to receive our information as it is. That's what the authentic no is about. So the point of this, how do I take this and make it relevant to our topic today, is that if someone in my office is out on medical leave and my boss comes up and says, Johnny, you need to now take over these 15 accounts, if I know that authentically I can't do it, then my job is to say no. Are there consequences for not being a yes
Yeah,
man?
we need to talk about that. Yes.
There might be consequences, and you need to be aware of that, and you need you need to understand what you're doing, and maybe we need to provide alternative.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that is the power of the authentic no, is that when I say yes, knowing I can't honestly do it, or I can't honestly be at peace with that yes, then I have now become the owner and the steward of all the resentments that are going to come up because of it.
Love that because I think so many of us can relate to the fact like we've said yes to something because we felt like we had to, we felt like we should, we felt like it was the right thing to do. And we're sitting here wondering why we don't love our careers because we said yes to things that we don't want to do. And it's like those things add up over time. And Johnny, when you were talking, I took this book off my shelf. It's called Real Self Care by Dr. Pooja Lakshmi. And if you read my newsletter, I've talked about this book probably like 3 times in the last 9 months because it was the best book I have read in a long time. And what Dr. Lakshmi talks about, she's a board certified psychiatrist. And one of the things she talks about is like, listen, we can set boundaries, we must set boundaries, but we also have to be realistic about the fact that boundaries always have consequences. And so we need to just make sure that we're aware of that and we're finding ways to balance. And one of the things that I talk about in my book all the time about boundaries is that sometimes as women in the workplace, we feel like we truly, authentically cannot say no. And I just want to hear from you in the chat. Plus one, if you ever feel like you've been put in a position at work where you everything inside of you was screaming to say no and you felt like you couldn't. Because I just want to normalize that this is so, so common. And so there's a few things I want to throw out there to you. Like, number one, I want you to re-examine that belief. So, Johnny, there's something I talk about in the book that I know you've heard me talk about, which is there's 3 reasons why high-performing women constantly bust through our boundaries. And it's one of the things that's killing us and keeping us from loving our careers. Number one, we've got the cost calculus wrong. We really think that we tend to overestimate the cost of disappointing other people
Yes.
and underestimate the cost of disappointing ourselves.
Yes. Yes.
2, we're letting that inner critic voice, that voice of self doubt, self judgment, masquerade as the voice of reason. And that's just making us make all the wrong decisions. And 3, to our point where we started, Johnny, our convo about external validation, we are rewarded for busting through our boundaries. So I remember a job that really burnt me out. Um, I felt like I couldn't set boundaries because like every time I bust through my boundaries to send the email to go on one extra trip, I felt like I was being rewarded for it, right?
Yeah.
With praise or with accolades. And the last thing I'll say here, and it's just a tactical tool. I love the authentic no. I think that's such a practical tool. And one other tool that I'll share is that I love when women use the golden rule of improv at work to set a boundary,
Oh,
which is
brilliant.
say yes and. And one of the best interviews I got to do in my book was with a woman named Colette Gregory. She is a mental health counselor turned improv comedian turned corporate trainer for Second City, like that famous improv group where Tina Fey and so many from SNL cut their teeth. And what Colette explains is that when we use that improv tool of yes and in the workplace, we have the opportunity to acknowledge the request from someone else without agreeing to it. So, Johnny, like examples of how I've used this with my clients before when they get an email to take something on that they can't. Yes, like from their boss, I would love to help with this. And when we sit down at our check in next meeting, let's realign on what the Q2 priorities are to make sure we're
Yes.
working towards the same KPIs. Or, yes, I would love for the team to be able to take this on. And they're really maxed out right now. So if we're going to hit all the deadlines with integrity, let's look at what else we can adjust for them.
That's right.
Um, my mother-in-law is one of the people who is dialed on in here, and I will tell you that I have used this tool with my own family life. So my mother-in-law asked to come visit, and it's a story I tell, so I'll tell it even though she's here. That she asked to come visit what was like the worst weekend of the entire year for her to come and visit. But I always want family to feel welcome in our house. So I wrote to her, yes, you can totally come that weekend. She had a conference. And this weekend's really busy for these 17 different reasons. So if you were going to come just to visit, I would choose a different weekend. If you're going to come for your conference, just come for a shorter amount of time. So I think that like yes and tool, it allows us to co-design what we want to build with our stakeholders,
Yes.
whether they are in the workplace or they're out of the workplace, but knowing how to balance those workplace relationships helps preserve our energy at work.
Mhm.
So I'm curious how that resonates with you, Johnny.
Oh, I think it's amazing because sometimes it's not that I don't want to do it, or the authentic no is really helpful when something feels like it's not fair, like I'm not being taken advantage of, I'm not being
Mm,
seen, I'm not being considered. No, I'm not going to take on the extra work of this person. Like that's not my responsibility. You need to hold that person accountable. Like no, like just because the person's not doing it doesn't mean it becomes my job. Like someone needs to hold that person accountable. And the other side of it is that yes, and I think it's really powerful.
Love that. And just to recap, like a few of the tools that we've talked about so far, right? About loving our career. Like number one, we've talked about the need to unhook and untether from external validation. Number two, we've talked about the need to take the time to define what it is that we want. And I just want to unpack that a teeny bit more. Sometimes I think when we talk about goals, we get so in our head. Goals have to be measured, goals have KPIs, goals have milestones. Another way I love to think about a goal is just asking myself questions like, what am I longing for? What do I wish I had more of? What do I wish I had less of? What could be different? So we talked about the idea of reimagining goals, looking at questions instead of answers. We've talked about boundaries as very, very important. In terms of making sure that we are able to set ourselves up with the emotional infrastructure to not just be successful, but to also make sure that we're not overloaded. And to that end, I know that one of the things that really makes people feel very crushed at work and makes it feel like they're sapping so much of the energy out is this hyper need to be productive. And I'm curious, like, where do you feel like we could recalibrate messages or internal expectations about our productivity to move the dial from I'm dreading where I am every single day to I love where I am every single day. And this was my enactment of like a dial moving. So, like, speaking of improv, this is my interpretive dance contribution to our conversation, Johnny.
Here for it. I want to participate.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, we
yes,
encourage you all to add in your own interpretive dances, even though we can't see you.
yes, that's right. That's right. So anyway, so for me, I when you talk about this idea, um, I think it really comes back down to understanding who I am, what I need, what I
Mm,
want, and what matters to me. There's it's foundational to everything. If you want a life that feels good, you have to understand what makes you tick. Like it just is as simple as that. And how do I understand what makes me tick? I go inside. A lot of times when I meet people out like at a bar or whatever, and they learn, I don't know, Randy, if you hear this, when people learn that you're a coach, they say, "Oh, coach me," like right now, right there. And I'm like, okay, listen, I'm gonna boil the entire best impact I could ever give you down to three statements. Okay. So I'm going to save you the engagement. If you were able to follow these three statements, you don't need anything else. Number one, you already are. You already are. That is a complete sentence. Understanding what it means that you already are, like it's the key to unlocking the world. Number two, you already know. You already know. Thank you, balloons. I love that Zoom is celebrating with us.
oh, I thought that you were putting those up.
No,
Oh
no,
my
you
God, you say
already know.
already.
You already know. There is nothing you don't already know. Three, the answer is in the stillness. Go inside and examine how you're feeling, what you're thinking. Have some quiet time, whether it's journaling, whether it's meditating, whether it's just thinking, taking a nice walk in a calm place. But the answers are already there if you're bold enough to go inside and ask yourself for the truth. And that's the guidance for what you just asked.
First of all, no one has ever asked me to coach them in public before. I'm grateful. It's like a doctor walking into a room and people trying to show them their moles, right?
Exactly. Same thing. Yes.
But I mean, I think that you really hit the nail on the head. Like the real keys to building a career we love is trusting that we have what we need in front of us, knowing that we already have the answers, and creating the time. And one of the biggest traps I see that again keep women caught in this feeling of resentment, this feeling of, I love Johnny, our colleague Alicia Doherty talks a lot about this, like just that feeling of like low grade constant dread. And she talks about like in her many years as a telecom executive about it's like she was successful on paper, She was leading this humongous team at this Fortune 500 company. And every single morning, it's not that she hated her career. She liked the people she worked with. She knew she was working on cool projects. She just woke up every single morning with dread. And I think, especially for women, we've been taught that we need to like second guess ourselves, that we should feel grateful, that, we shouldn't pay attention to those cues in our body. Um, and there's so much social scripting we get. And I think one of the things that compounds that is that we're so attached to this idea of performing productivity. Like everything in our culture is so performative. Like even today, I like will not go on Instagram today. It's Valentine's Day. Obviously, this is our Valentine's Day special. I've been with my partner since I'm 19 years old. I do not need to make a Valentine's Day post about how gushy our love is because I don't need to perform our relationship in front of an audience.
Yeah.
And I think so many of us, and COVID really made this worse. So many of us feel trapped, like we have to perform at work, we have to perform our worth. And it leads us to say yes to things we don't want to say yes to. It makes us feel like we can't put our phone down when we want to put our phone down. And I really think that, like, when we think about building a career that we love, it's less about like how productive am I going to be in my career and thinking about what's the impact I want to make in my career. So productive is like getting through your to-do list for the sake of getting through your to-do list. Where we think about being impactful is about like really moving the dial on something, making success a team sport. And Johnny, if I could just say one more thing about this, a lot of times I don't know if you experience this with people. People like they tell me they're like, I'm so upset with work. I'm going to quit my job and take a break and do my own thing. And I often give them an answer, Johnny, that might be unpopular. It's often not what they want to hear, but I often tell them, I don't want you to quit your job because here's the issue. When you leave your job, you still take your bad habits with you.
Yes.
I'm going
Yes.
to say that one more time. When you leave your job, you take your bad habits with you. It's like Taylor Swift said, and I don't always agree with this, right? I think there's a lot of macro issues, but like Taylor's, it's like it's you, you're the problem, it's you. It's like changing our job doesn't automatically liberate us.
Correct.
Changing our job doesn't automatically pivot us to a career that we love.
No.
A lot of the changes that we need to make with our boundaries, our goals, our values, you know, they're the harder changes and we take them with them. And in fact, Johnny, you talked about values earlier. And I often people are like, values, like it's such like a crunchy thing. And I agree because I think like values, Johnny, have become kind of like the new kale in that like it's just like this hot thing that we talk about and no one's actually sure if they even like it.
Yeah.
But what I try to explain to people, if anyone here, throw me a +1 in the chat if you've ever seen the movie Legally Blonde. What I try to explain to people is
Oh,
like it's actually really simple. Living your values is like that scene in Legally Blonde where, she's like convinced that that woman Brooke didn't shoot her husband because
of
she's like,
course.
exercise makes you happy. Being happy gives you endorphins. Happy people just don't shoot their husbands. They just
Yes.
don't.
Yes.
People who are living in alignment with their values and their core beliefs, they don't hate their jobs. They don't feel dreadful. So I encourage you, if you've been, we're going to talk in a moment about if you've been thinking about a career transition, that can definitely help you create love in your work life, but it's not just the silver bullet. And so I just want to say to people, like, it's really like not about finding that one thing, but it's about so many of the tools Johnny's given us so far, that those small steps from, our boundaries to our goals to really think about like moving the dial a little bit less from dread and a little bit more to love over time. And as we figure out how to correct for boundaries or
Yes.
overwork,
Yes.
those that progress kind of compounds and starts to move faster.
Yes. Yes. I love that.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Um, Johnny, another question that I have for you. I think one of the things that really saps a lot of our energy, and I want to remind people to please put your questions in the chat, is how do you recommend handling tough relationships in the workplace? Like some of us, I know I've personally worked with people who are like legitimately toxic to the point where like I made formal complaints.
Yeah.
Some of us work in environments where we just have like mean girls or we have clients that are rude. Or maybe we're an entrepreneur and we're really afraid to set a boundary with a new client because like we need the paycheck coming in. How do you recommend handling relationships that feel tough for you in the workplace and staying relationships focused, but also being true to really bringing love to the forefront in your work life?
So, I have a multi-step process for
Hit
this.
us.
The first step is diplomacy, right?
Hmm.
So, is it something that I can impact through emotional intelligence? Okay, so that's because listen, not this that completely discounts blame. That
Okay.
person may be fully to blame. I may be not at all to blame. Is it fair that I have to now like apply the tool of emotional intelligence to resolve this? Well, regardless of if it's fair, it's probably in my best interest to resolve this through diplomacy if I can. Like, that's it. I'm giving myself the best outcome by doing this. It's not fair. Life's not fair. Fine. If that doesn't work, if I can't smooth things over one on one, then in my opinion, as a former HR director, like turn it over to the process. Turn it over to the process because then even if the organization doesn't do anything about it, I can then start to hold the organization accountable if I need to. There are processes and systems in place in most workplaces. Hey, if I'm in a small startup, there's a lovely gentleman that you and I both know who was in a startup that kind of had some issues, and there weren't a lot of processes in place to handle stuff like that. So that happens sometimes, but if there are processes in place, use them because I don't need to get into it. Like I'm just going to go, I'm going to follow the system that's in the handbook and move on with my life. It's not ideal, it's not perfect, it doesn't eliminate the awkwardness, but it's about at that point recouping as much of my time and energy as I can and moving on.
It's interesting, like in the spirit of like trying to use diplomacy and then letting go. I'd be curious to hear from you all in the chat. Like, how many of you have ever, give me like a plus one if you've ever like taken it upon yourself to try to change somebody in the workplace?
Yeah.
I feel like one of the things I've experienced in my career, and I'm curious if you all have as well, is like when somebody like didn't like me or when someone was hard on me or mean to me, I felt like I had to like double down in proving that I was competent or proving that I was good. But really, like this person didn't have my best interest at heart, right? Or there was like bullying in the workplace, or we have like that toxic femininity culture where women really cut each other down in the workplace. Are there no plus ones in the chat? Has no one ever literally tried to take it upon themselves to change or influence other people? Thank you,
Mm-hmm.
Angelique. I know I can't be alone because I talk about this with my coaching clients all the time.
All
Oh,
right,
Gretchen goes,
Gretchen.
I would like to give you a plus 20. Thank you,
Yeah.
Gretchen. I know this is about external validation, so I didn't need your plus 20, but I graciously accept it. Um, and I feel like especially as women, we take on so much of the emotional labor of like
Yeah.
being the office like relationship whisperer and therapist. And like when I look back on like places where I should have left somewhere earlier, the thing that kept me there was not even my fear, but about like wanting to prove myself. And I think the biggest lesson that I've learned in falling in love again with my career is like just to trust myself and to trust that I do bring diplomacy and emotional intelligence to situations and to check myself when I'm feeling threatened. Not because like you're competitive with me, but I mean like threatened and like I'm scared that the way that you just emailed me or talked to me makes me feel unlikable or makes me feel incompetent, that that's about me. I try and remember, and it's something I talk about in the book, that really like golden rule of feedback, which is that feedback is not an immutable truth about who we are. It's a data point.
Yes.
Feedback is not an immutable truth about who we are. It's a data point. And I think one of the things that really drains women from having a career they love is that, again, like we're trying to contort ourselves to fit into all the feedback that we've gotten. And, Johnny, I'm looking, I know that the audience can't see each other, but I can see the audience. And from the names that I recognize, I see we have women here in the group who are experienced in their careers. I see women who are 35 to almost 70 who are here with us today. And what I would encourage you, whether you have 10, 15 years under your belt of experience or you're counting in the decades, is just remember this. If someone came to you with a business problem and they gave you 2,000 data points, right? Because every email we have, Johnny, is a data point. Every conversation we have is a data point. And they were like, make a decision on the business based on the data. And you came back to the group and you said, we have 2,000 data points that are trending this way, but I think we should make a multi-billion-dollar decision on the outlier. You would get kicked out of the room.
Yeah.
Right. And so we need to bring that rigor to the way that we process feedback and to say, like, wait, this is important, but what does this tell me about the feedback giver? What does this tell me about me? Is this an outlier? Is this a trend? I mean, outliers, we want to get curious about outliers. If you've ever looked at data sets in your
Yes.
job, right? Like outliers tell stories. But
Yes.
I just find it hard to believe that like we would ever make like a pivotal business decision based on the outlier.
Exactly,
So,
exactly. And in your something that you talked about in your book is the getting to know your inner critic questions. You talked about your friend Shira and her inner critic and how it would flare up. And really it's about that. It's like, okay, I've received this negative feedback. Everything is flaring up inside of me. My inner critic is hyperactive right now. And so I need to get to know what this is about. I really need to look a little bit deeper and understand what's going on. I need to see what's true. I need to see what's not true. I need to see what might be true. And I don't need to bleed out my power due to
oof,
uninvestigated fear.
wow. Whew, didn't make it today.
Yeah.
Um, and it's clearly hitting people in the chat. Like Brittany, while you were talking, Johnny, she said, I need to learn to diversify my data points, especially with people I can trust. My husband's a data scientist, and the one thing he would tell you about data is like your outputs mean nothing if your inputs don't have integrity. And I think that that's such an important point. Johnny, we've talked about, and again, we have time for your questions. We've talked about so many things today about making those pivots with our internal self, the boundaries, the relationships, the goals, the longings, the values. Sometimes building a career that we love means that we are ready to take a leap. We are ready to pivot. And especially when we're more advanced in our career and we might not have dusted up our resume in like 5, 10, 15, 20 years, or, we haven't interviewed for a job in a decade because we're just known in our industry and now we want to pivot. We don't know where to start. So, with your career coach on, with your experiencing helping really established, middle and senior level women make career pivots, what are some of the small baby steps that if building a career that they can fall in love with again means getting a new job, what are some tips that you could give the women who are here today?
Yes. I love this. And also, Graciela, I see that your hand's raised. If you have a question, please put it in the chat. We'd love to
Oh,
hear
yes.
what it
Thanks,
is.
Graciela. Yes.
Yeah, I don't want to leave you out in the cold, Graciela. So just heads up there. So for me, this really comes. So I take all of my marching orders around this work with clients from PR, right?
Okay. Great.
So I take my guide on this from how PR firms help organizations make big pivots. Listen, if Netflix can pivot from DVDs by mail to becoming the foremost name in streaming, like I can pivot from this industry to that, or from this type of function to that type of function. It's possible. But it is terrifying for a decision maker to take someone who has not already proven herself in a particular role and put her in that role. It takes a huge leap of faith, right? So you want to be a data scientist. You've never been a data scientist. I'm scared to give you that title. I need to know you can handle it.
Thank
And
you
so,
for being honest about how people are seeing it from the other side of the table, because I think this is something that women honestly fear.
yeah,
And so, like, thank you for validating it and telling us how we can overcome it. And I'm gonna like to show it back to you. Like, what I'm hearing from you is like it's all about how you retell your story.
yes, it is storytelling. It is storytelling, and it's really it's simple. Okay, so first of all, the first hard truth about making a big pivot is that it will take you longer. It will take you more no's, not more no's. It will take
Yeah.
you more instances of hearing no in order to get through, and that's just the fact of it. If you're going for a less proven path, a more experimental path, pivoting to something you haven't done before, people are going to tell you no more often, and that's okay. That is just how the game is played.
No gets you closer to yes.
Yes, exactly. So that's really important. The second thing about this is to say, what areas of my skills and expertise are going to resonate and comfort? They are going to mitigate the risk in the mind of the next hiring executive. So if that person is going to look for someone who can bring stability, I'm just randomly picking, depending, it could be
Yes.
anything. It could be innovation, ability to innovate. It could be innovation to stabilize the ship. It could be not subject matter expert in mergers and acquisitions. Whatever the 3 or 4 main topics are that are going to resonate in the mind of that person, I need to highlight those things. I need to float them to the top of my resume content. I need to float them to the top of my interview answers. So I'm putting myself in the mind of the person who's going to be considering me, saying what matters to them, what will calm their fears about me as a candidate, and then I'm going to emphasize those things. And in that way, I reverse engineer my branding and my marketing so that I'm totally honest and authentic, yet I'm also resonating with what that person needs from me. That is, in my opinion, the sweet spot for assuring a pivot. It takes thought, it takes research, and I'll quiet after this. The way that I identify what that decision maker needs is I pull some real life job descriptions right now for the type of roles I want, 3 or 4 of them, and then I average them all out. I triangulate between them and say, okay, here's what I see in common. These are the things that matter the most in the minds of the decision makers that I need to impress. And I'm
So
going to find that inside of them.
just to recap, like it sounds like it's actually just like taking it's actually very simple of just like literally it's like as simple as tweaking a bullet point on your resume to connect the dots. It is as simple as updating your LinkedIn profile to highlight that you've done strategy work, even if you've been in like, I don't know, like chemical manufacturing operations, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
yeah, right. So like that's the thing. It's about owning your story, right?
Yes.
What's your
Yes.
message? How do you want people to hear it? Keep telling it to them over and over again, those small steps, right? Like update your
Yes.
LinkedIn profile, update your resume. Like I think sometimes we're so in our head and the bias actually needs to be to action. So
Yeah.
Johnny, we have one more question. And we're gonna lightning round this to you because I want to have a few minutes to talk to everyone about what comes next from here and also give them like 2 minutes to pivot to their next Zoom meeting, right? So Johnny, I know this one will be near and dear to your heart. Graciela is asking if you had one tip about networking for someone who doesn't like networking, what would it be your best tip? And then I'm going to give mine because Johnny, I know it's so funny. You coach so much on this, and you're the first to say you hate networking. So this
I
is
hate
so
it.
personal for you. And
Yes.
I love networking. So I'll give my tip after that. So,
Yes.
best tip for Graciela.
Graciela, the tip is find out how you can help. I call it service first networking. Service first networking means when I approach any networking situation, my true honest, this is not me being sneaky or manipulative. My true intention is how can I be of service to this person? When I do that, I often find that if the person has the bandwidth to help me, they will automatically reciprocate and ask. That accomplishes the reciprocation without me having to put myself at the risk of rejection, which is really hard for me.
Okay, your advice is definitely better than mine. So I should have gone first because your advice is better, which is such great advice, right? Like always lead from that place of service. The thing that I would add at Graciela, whether it's you or anyone else, like I think the key to networking, or I would say this is the key to like putting your message out there and building your brand on LinkedIn, is like you have to find ways to make it authentically fun. You have to find ways to make it authentically fun. I went to a networking event last week that was like a Galentine's Day cookie decorating. Why did I go? Because it was so much more fun than going to like, I don't know, like the technology future of work roundtable. Like that didn't authentically call me the way that cookie decorating did at the Chief Clubhouse. I know some of you here are Chief members. And so I find that like if it's fun, I show up authentically. Another thing I like to do is like I like to make my own networking events because like I know that they're fun for me, right?
Meetup,
Um,
sign up for a meetup account. You can do
yeah,
that.
yeah, or come to another Sunday Nature event, or like if you're a part of a group like Chief or an alumni association or Athena Line, so many of these groups that are out there, like women in government relations, I'm just scanning the chat and seeing what women are affiliated with here. Like make your own meetup. Right? Or if you know that networking is better for you one-on-one, set a KPI. And Johnny, I know that's something you're so tactical with clients is to set the metric you're going to achieve. Like say, I'm going to do 2 coffees this month. Amazing. That's sipping and savoring. So just to recap some of the things that we covered, right? I'm going to almost like work backwards. We talked about if you want to make a career pivot, like taking small actions, know your story, update your resume, have a conversation, update your LinkedIn, think about your relationships, set your boundaries, think about your goals. Unhook from external validation. So we covered obviously so many things.
A lot.
And I'd love to hear from you as we're wrapping up in the chat. What is one thing you're walking away with today or that you're going to practice?
Yes,
What is
please.
one thing you're going to walk away with today or practice? Is it that you're updating your resume? Is it that you're setting a boundary? Is it that you're making more time for your self care? Is it that you are setting your authentic no? I want to hear from you in the chat. One thing you are walking away with today or that you are going to try from here. So while we wait for those to come in, I just want to share my screen and I want to tell you about a few ways that we can all kind of keep the conversation going together. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great.
It says we'll begin shortly. Yeah, there you are.
There we go. So we have a few other events coming up. One is our Something Major virtual co-working club. It's free. It's Friday. Come tackle your to-do list with us. I'll be in Miami March 5th doing a free talk at Books and Books. For those of you in New York City, I know we have some women who are already signed up. I'll be doing an International Women's Day lunch. And June 7th, we'll be having our annual retreat here in DC. There are so many more events on the Something Major website. I also want to invite you to join a program. So we'll be having a new cohort for working moms with young children who are returning to work from mat leave that kicks off on March 21st. And Johnny is leading a career transition group that is going to be kicking off on May 1st. This is for experienced women who are looking to make a career pivot, whether you're changing industries or just looking to level up in the same one. Space is going to be limited. We'll be sharing more details. That kicks off May 1st. Please feel free to pick up my book, which is like just an honest to God cheat sheet of everything that we talked about today and
Yes.
is now out on Amazon. But I want to encourage you to stay in touch. So you can link here to find me on LinkedIn or Instagram. I love keeping in touch with you. And I just want to revisit our chat and just see what everyone's walking away with. The authentic no, carving out time to think and assess, knowing I already am, looking at the Limitless book, making more time for myself. Nothing makes me happier, Johnny, than when we see a room full of 50, 60 women who are walking away with a different perspective because every single woman who joined us today has a different origin story, a different set of beliefs. And it's just really fantastic to be able to hear from you all. So with that said, I'm going to throw the link to our Something Major events in the chat. And I
Good.
want to thank you all so much for coming today. It was really just such an incredible opportunity to have you all here. Johnny, thank you so much again for sharing all of your insights.
Thank you, Randy.
And for those of you who want to know more about the program, Johnny's kicking off on May 1st. Feel free to drop us an email. We'll be sharing more details. Johnny, happy Valentine's Day to you,
You
my
too.
forever husband. I adore
Yes.
you. I
Yes.
adore each and every one of you who showed up. And happy candy eating, everyone. Take care.
Bye, everyone.